Advisor to President Obama, CNN chief political analyst David Axelrod. Just an unbelievable profile to read, Ax. I wonder, what's your impression of this and the effect it would have in the White House on her being able to do her job?
Yeah, well, look, this is really unusual. These are the kinds of reflections, some of these reflections are the kind of reflections that you see in retrospective pieces, not in real time. And so the vehemence with which she's responded to it gives you a sense of her feelings about what this could do. Why she sat down, my sense is this is the kind of thing where you were told this, the author has written books about chiefs of staff in the White House, and perhaps she thought this would be written after she was gone in a retrospective way. And it should be said that there's a lot of this interview in which she is very supportive of the president, on the Epstein files, for example, and what it says about him. And frankly, she defended Bill Clinton a little bit there as well against some of the things that Trump said. But basically, she is supportive of the president, and she explains some things that others might be highly critical of. But there are places there that are, on tariffs, on the USAID, on the pardons of the January 6th people, particularly the violent offenders, where she says, I gave him different advice. Once he made his decision, I supported that. We should point, I think the most interesting thing in the whole piece was her description of the president as an alcoholic personality. We know he doesn't drink. He had a sibling who died of alcoholism. But it was an interesting statement because she said her father, Pat Summerall, the famous football player and announcer, had issues with alcohol, and that framed her experience, and that taught her how to deal with the president and his moods and his exuberance and all of that. And I thought that was quite an insight into the president, but also their relationship, because if you're the child of an alcoholic, you learn how to roll with those moods and moderate the worst impulses of that person and try and protect them from themselves. And in many ways, you read this piece and it feels like that's what she's trying to do.
Yeah, it's notable because she describes this feeling on behalf of the president that there's nothing he can do. So it speaks to that sort of impulsiveness.
Nothing that he can't do, yeah.
Nothing, right. And it speaks to that impulsiveness, which notably previous chiefs of staff to President Trump in his first term seemed to try to sort of tamp down. I'm thinking of Reince Priebus, John Kelly as well. The way that J.D. Vance describes her approach to the job is notable given that contrast. He says, quote, there's this idea that people have that I think was very common in the first administration, that their objective was to control the president or influence the president or even manipulate the president because they had to in order to serve the national interest. Susie just takes the diametrically opposite viewpoint, which is that she's a facilitator and that the American people have elected Donald Trump. Her job is to actually facilitate his vision and to make his vision come to life. In that sense, would you describe her as being an effective chief of staff?
Well, listen, let me say this. I think that she ran a brilliant campaign for Donald Trump. And part of the way she ran that campaign is that she grabbed hold of those things that she could control, and she worked with the things that she couldn't control. And they had this very rational campaign that that operated very effectively alongside a sometimes irrational candidate. And she won his trust by being very good at what she did, but also at being willing to accept the things that she couldn't change and, yes, facilitate them. And I think she's carried that philosophy. You read this piece, you say she carried that philosophy into the White House as well. It's harder there, though, because government is a lot more complex than campaigns, and there are a lot more moving parts and a lot more players, and the consequences of everything you do are a lot greater. I will say on J.D. Vance, one of the most interesting things in this in these interviews, I guess there were multiple interviews, was her characterization of J.D. Vance as a kind of opportunistic adopter of Trump when he was running for the U.S. Senate versus Marco Rubio, to whom she's close and was an advocate for him as when he became vice president, or the nominee for vice president, who she said was very principled, would never sacrifice his principles, and really had to work through his relationship with Trump. That is interesting, and I wonder what kinds of implications that has for her relationships in the White House, because those two guys, while they now say they are allies, and Rubio says he's going to be the candidate for president, a lot of people think that they may not be aligned come 2028, and they may be opponents for that. So she may have run headlong into a bit of a civil war there down the line.
Yeah, look, we're going to find out whether internally and externally politically what the fallout, if there is fallout from this. But I wonder what you think, David, about the value of Americans just knowing these things. You mentioned the January 6 rioters thing, that she didn't think the blanket pardon thing was the way to go. About USAID, quote, no rational person could think the USAID process was a good one. Nobody. And she concedes that the administration needs to look harder at the process for which they are deporting people. She said it was, for instance, a mistake when that mother and U.S. citizen children were deported, including one who had cancer, including a child who had cancer. What's the value to the American people having this glimpse inside?
Well, what it does say is that there were people inside who were telling the president, urging the president to take a different course, and he did not. And so I think that has real implications because now people say, look, even your own chief of staff told you this was not right. This is the wrong path for you to take, and you disregarded that. So I think there are implications for this. Look, back in before you guys were born, when Ronald Reagan was president, David Stockman, who was the director of the Office of Management and Budget, did an interview in which he basically acknowledged that all of this talk of supply side economics, that you could cut taxes deeply and it would pay for itself, was a canard, a hoax, in order to achieve what they wanted to achieve. And he paid a big price for that, and it was a huge embarrassment for the administration. So there will be political implications of this, but it's also like an incredible look at what's going on inside that administration. And now they're doing, as you can see from the reaction from the White House, you know, it's major cleanup on aisle 7 here for them, and it may be that this spills into other aisles as well.
Yeah, we will definitely see. In fact check, I was alive for the Reagan presidency, though I mightily appreciate your math, David. I really do. Thanks for being with us. And